now we're standing at the site of Shechem. If you look over here, you see a minaret barely sticking up above those olive trees. You see that? Muslim mosque minaret?
Yeah.
That is Sikar. Okay? Then this is Mount Ebal to my right, some of your left. This over here is Mount Gerizim. And then you can barely see the Ottoman building that's sticking up on top of Mount Gerizim. That's sitting on top of a Byzantine church, which is sitting on top of the Samaritan temple. Okay, so...
Joe?
Yeah.
What is that thing that looks like the Jefferson Memorial up there?
That is a very, very, from what I hear, he's the wealthiest Palestinian in the West Bank. That's his
That's a private
house.
residence?
Yes.
Wow.
Are these the two mountains that they yelled the blessings and the curses?
Yes, but we'll go over that later. We're going to take it layer by layer, okay? So, the first layer we have to understand is this. When Jesus and the Samaritan woman are having their conversation down here, Shechem and the Samaritan temple are all in ruins. Nobody's living in the site that you're standing in when they're having the conversation down there. Okay, so why is that? Because they were destroyed by somebody. Who destroyed the Samaritans' main cities and their temple up on Mount Gerizim?
The Syrians?
Good guess. The Jews.
Oh.
Okay, so you remember the Hasmonean period? Are you familiar with what the Hasmonean period means? It's the Maccabean revolt. Okay, and the Jews won their independence for a short time, a little over 100 years, from the Greek Empire. And one of the leaders, the Hasmonean leaders, John Hyrcanus, after they took Jerusalem, then they started taking land to the north. He came up here and he destroyed this area, okay, with the Samaritans. So that's why when they're down there having the conversation, and the Samaritan woman is, you know, she is shocked that a Jewish man is speaking to her, because there's not an association, there's no association between Jews and Samaritans. It's because who the Babylonians and the Romans are to the Jews, the ones who destroyed their temple, the Jews are to the Samaritans, whom they're the ones who destroyed their temple and this city. Okay? Now, there's different ways that you go about destroying a city. The way John Hyrcanus went about destroying this city was in a way that it would never be inhabited again. Okay? And so one thing that he did is he ruined the water source. There used to be a water source that came down from springs on Mount Gerizim, and it was very systematic that this place was wiped out so that it wouldn't have water, so that it wouldn't be inhabited again. Okay? We don't ever read about Sikar in the Old Testament, probably because after this place was destroyed, that probably became now a satellite village or town that came about after the destruction of Shechem. So, why wasn't this place re-inhabited? It was a problem of water. The Samaritan woman lived over there on the side of that hill, and look how far she had to go for water. She had to go all the way over to the well, all the way down over there, maybe several times a day. So when Jesus sat down at the well and talked to her, being Jesus is God, he knew exactly the heart of the matter to get at. And he starts talking to her about water and about living water. And of course, it's one of the most profound conversations in the Bible. And so in context, you have to destroy all this stuff is destroyed in ruins at the time of that conversation. Because I just noticed, you see this tree right here that has no leaves on it? That's a fig tree.
Oh.
Okay, the one next to it is an olive tree. And these trees over here are fig trees, and they're starting a little earlier than usual, but you see that they're barely starting to come up with their leaves. See that? Feel how warm it is? And Jesus uses this, right, as a sign for the end times. He says, you know, just as you can look at the fig tree, and when it's just starting to have its leaves come out, then you know that summer is near. Then there's certain things that we can look for as far as signs that will tell us that the end is near. So we're looking down on a gate here. We're looking at the east gate for the tell. And this gate is from the Judges period, basically. It's a double gate, as you can see, and you can see that the gate itself slid in between those stones. Do you see that? And there was a gate down, the first gate, and then down here, once you come into the city further, there's a second gate. You see that?
Yeah.
And then it's a killing zone in the middle there. If you break through the first gate, then they kill you while you're in there, or while you're trying to break through the second gate. But I want you to look at something far less impressive looking, but far more important is if you look outside of the gate, you see some structures down there in the deep, in the trench that they built down there. Do you see those structures? Probably houses. Okay. So remember yesterday we were at Jericho and we saw that the earlier city was bigger than the later city. Remember that? And so this is the same situation here. So the earlier city, the older city, is bigger than when they made this gate later in the history of Shechem. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
So the oldest period that Shechem goes back to is this early bronze period. Well, I mean biblically anyways, is this early bronze period. And Abraham is right in that time period where the early bronze switches over to middle bronze, okay? And so these structures down here come basically from that time period. So I want to read, we'll start in on the history of Shechem, starting in chapter 12 of Genesis, okay? Chapter 12 isn't very far into the Bible in Genesis, is it? Okay? So it says this, verse 6 of chapter 12. Abram, not Abraham yet, Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. So the first place that Abram is mentioned in this land is here at Shechem. In fact, we're standing, if you look, you can barely see the Moabite, the Jordanian mountains in the very distant horizon, right? And so if you drop over that ridge line, then you go down into the Jordan Valley. We are only 12 kilometers from where Abraham and later Jacob crossed over the Jordan River at a place called Adam. And so they came over there, 12 kilometers up through this gap over here to our north and into the area of Shechem. And this is the first place in the land that God says to that he will give this land to the offspring of Abraham. You got to remember, when he says that to Abram, who's standing right around here somewhere, when he appears to him and makes him that promise, he's 75 years old with no children. Okay? It's a radical thing for God to say to him. Now I'm in Genesis 33, verse 18. It says, "After Jacob came from Padan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan and camped within sight of the city." You see where he camped? We know he dug a well right over there. Within sight of the city. For 100 pieces of silver he bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent. Okay, so one of the first holdings outside of Hebron area where Abraham ended up buying the plot of land to bury his wife Sarah. Then we have a plot of land bought here by Jacob. So we have a very, very strong connection here with the patriarchs. They moved around a lot because they were nomadic. They were here, they were in the Hebron area, they were in Beersheba area, and they were in several different places. They were in the Bethel area, and so on and so forth. But oh yeah, Dinah, the story of Dinah, that, you know, she is raped here, and then the sons of Jacob, who was it? Reuben, I think. Reuben and Levi take revenge on the men, and they make the agreement with them that if they will all be circumcised, the men of Shechem, then they can take, you know, their people from them for wives, and so they get circumcised, and then while they're still in pain, then the men go in and kill all the men of Shechem. So we were at Jericho yesterday, and so they took out Jericho. They came up to Ai, and they eventually took Ai, and then they came up here to Shechem, and they renewed the covenant. They chose this particular place to renew the covenant with the Lord. And so we're not going to read the whole thing. It's quite lengthy, but it's a good one to read when you get home tonight if you got the energy. But he divides the tribes, the 12 tribes, into 6 tribes each. And so you got to put 6 tribes of Israel over on Mount Gerizim over here, right, facing this way. And then you got to put the other 6 tribes on the side of Mount Ebal here. And then you've got this side shouting the blessings of the covenant. If the people keep the covenant, then they get these blessings, and then these 6 tribes are shouting over this way the curses of the covenant. If they don't keep the covenant, if they break the covenant, then they will get the curses. One of those curses, for example, is that your fortified cities will be turned into rubble. Which do they get? Do they get the blessings, or do they get the curses? They get the curses. And that happens, of course, starting with the Assyrians when they come in and destroy these sites, including Shechem. This is the west gate. We were just over at the east gate. But do you see the mud brick wall on top of the stone revetment wall over here? So you can barely see some mud brick still in it. Over here, it's even worse. See all that's left? This is what typically you find when you dig a wall down and find that there was a mud brick wall on top of it one time that didn't collapse. It just turns into this pile of goo, into this pile of mud. And in short order, this was excavated back in the 60s. You know, soon after a few more rains, eventually they'll be gone, like they're gone from a lot of the other parts of the revetment wall. So again, archaeology is tricky. It in itself is destructive. So when you can see a phenomenon that correlates really well with Scripture, when you're looking at it at the time of excavation, it doesn't necessarily look like that 40 years later, or 50 years later, or 60 years later after it's been weathered and in the rain and everything so much. But this is what you typically find when you excavate a wall. Now we'll walk around here and we'll look at the revetment wall. Here's the major point of why I'm showing you this. We're not talking about radically different, unique things from one site to another. We're talking about the same phenomenon from one site to another. Okay? This is the retaining wall, the Middle Bronze fortification system that lasted into the Late Bronze period. So right as I was saying, the early bronze turns to Middle Bronze is where Abraham generally is. Late Bronze is where Joshua and the conquest happens. And so we were standing looking at the retaining wall yesterday at Jericho. Now we're looking at the retaining wall here at Shechem. We could look at the retaining wall at Hebron. We could look at it at Megiddo. We could look at it at Hatzor, so on and so forth. At this time period, they started fortifying their cities in this way. Okay, and you find them all over the country. You can see where we're sitting right here. The ridge route is coming down right here, and this is a crossroad. This gap right down through here goes down to the Mediterranean, down to that highway I was telling you about, the Way of the Sea that runs along the Mediterranean. And so this is a crossroad. You can see the city is sitting on flat ground, so at this time, after the battering ram comes along, they got to get the cities built up higher and more defensible. So they build these retaining walls. They fill in the inside with fill like a snow cone, and then they put mud brick walls on top of here. You can still look over there and see the mud brick walls melting with each season of rain. And so the difference with Jericho is that you don't find this phenomenon in Jericho. You find the collapse bricks over the edge in the pile, like we looked at in Kenyon's report, up to the edge of the retaining wall. So look this structure over that I'm standing in right now, that you're entering. Look this structure over, and then decide what you think it is. Okay, archaeologically speaking, what do you think this is?
Temple.
Temple? Anyone else? What? Palace? Okay. Okay, one thing I want to show you is you got to see this, so come over. You got to see this, so come over here. Okay, just watch me. Right here, I'm standing on the edge of the wall of this building, and now I'm moving across how wide this wall is, all the way to here. Wow, that is a massive wall. That's like a city wall. I mean, and this is the wall of a building. Same thing over there, same thing over here. What on earth is a wall this thick doing for a building? Okay? And here is the point. Thank the Lord, we don't have to guess what this site is. If we don't have an ancient text that tells us what something is, then exactly the process that we just went through is exactly what archaeologists do. And if you put often 10 archaeologists on the same place, they often come up with 10 different interpretations of what that site is. You see the problem? We don't have to guess. We don't have to speculate on what this building is, because it's right here in our Bibles. And all we have to do is turn to the ancient text, and it tells us what it is. It's in Judges chapter 9. Okay, so we move from the patriarch period to the conquest period, and now we're in the Judges period. Okay. So, this is the story of Abimelech. Does everybody remember who Abimelech is? Yeah. Abimelech is one of the sons of Gideon. And he killed his 70 brothers to take over, right? And he wanted to be the king. And so it says this. It says, on hearing this, by the way, he was from one of Gideon's wives that was from Shechem. And it says, I'm reading in verse 46, on hearing this, the citizens in the tower of Shechem, oh wait, I should probably read a little bit more. Verse 6, then all the citizens of Shechem and Beth Milo gathered beside the great tree at the pillar. They gathered at the pillar in Shechem to crown Abimelech king. So it says specifically where they crowned Abimelech king is at the pillar at Shechem. You see that pillar over there? Now that is standing now, and it was found. That's a standing stone. It is commemorating this temple. That's the deity that's commemorated in this temple. It was found laying on the ground, but the slot that it fit into was found next to it, and so they put it back into the slot, and that's modern concrete around it so that it's standing today. But there you have a very specific place that the Bible talks about that's correlated with the biblical record. Okay? Then they have a falling out, the people of Shechem with Abimelech, and so I'll skip over to verse 46. On hearing this, the citizens in the tower of Shechem, some translations, which I like better, call it the fortress temple. Okay? Archaeologists didn't know what a fortress temple was until they dug here and they found this, and they were like, oh, that's a fortress temple. If you look at the sign over there, it calls this a fortress temple. Okay? The tower of Shechem went into the stronghold of the temple of El Berit. So we even know the name of this temple. When Abimelech heard that they had assembled there, he and his men went up onto the mountain, and he took an axe and he cut these branches, which he lifted to his shoulders. He ordered the men with him, quick, do what you have seen me do. So all the men cut branches and followed Abimelech. They piled them against the stronghold and set it on fire over the people inside. So all the people in the tower of Shechem, about 1,000 men and women, also died. The archaeologist, it was Harvard University that did the excavations here in the 60s, a guy named Wright. And he puts this fortress temple, this tower here, at least 3 or 4 stories high. That's why these walls are so wide, is because there were several stories. And then it was burned in the Judges period. So we have the destruction, we have the, if you pick one thing, just one main thing that a site is famous for in Scripture, and then the one thing archaeologically that it's well known for, in each site you find this amazing correlation. Jericho, obviously it's the collapsed wall. Here at Shechem, it would be this fortress temple. The Bible talks about this massive destruction of a fortress temple. They dig here, they find a massive destruction of a fortress temple. It's historical. I mean, the amazing thing to me, which you can understand if you live in Utah, is my whole struggle in Utah all the time was, man, I mean, it's so obvious that the Book of Mormon is not historical, but nobody around here can see it. And it drove me nuts. Now I come over here and it's the opposite. It's, man, the Bible is so historical, but nobody around here can see it. I don't understand, and it's just as annoying. It's more annoying. So we have the correlation between archaeology and the Bible. But you also have all these debates of all the scholars that are debating this and that. They debate everything. But if you take and remove all that aside and you look just at what the text says and just at what was found archaeologically, you see the historicity of the Bible loud and clear and simple enough for a child to understand it.